grief. But it is good to have grief though, right? I think we all
Absolutely.
agree.
It's true.
Grief
Yeah.
is good
Yeah,
because it's an expression of feelings, of emotions.
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. One of the
Exactly.
things that I think is really interesting that I am noticing,
Hmm.
sorry, is it okay that I'm talking?
Yeah, you go for it. I was just
Okay.
muting it. Sorry, go for it.
Oh, okay. Um, One of the things that I've been noticing a lot because I work with kids and spend a lot of time educating them about feelings and things like that is that I think societally we're still really afraid of having big emotions and having emotions that kind of can be consuming of us.
Mhm.
And there are things that's just really a part, an aspect of humanity, and an aspect of being human is feeling something with intensity, and that's okay. And I think that like when because I still feel like we try to stifle feelings out of people. Like you should be regulated all the time. Well, no, you shouldn't. Like you're responding to stimulus and input and experiences all the time, and not always are those experiences going to keep your nervous system regulated. And
Yeah.
so with with Zeke, I had been thinking a lot about how he had been.
Zeke's her cat, just FYI, because
Yeah, sorry,
we talked it. I was
my
like, just in case
oh
you're
gosh,
tuning in,
oh gosh,
she
yeah,
lost her other cat, Sheba, and Zeke is her
Shiva.
other cat that's still living.
Yeah, so I've
So we
been
were
thinking
talking
a
about
lot
animal
about
grief.
my male cat that was left behind when Sheba passed, and
Yeah.
his name is Zeke. And um, it's interesting because I was like, well, I can't like, I need to be. We as a society often minimize experiences and minimize the intensity of experience. And
Mm.
one of the things that like I was really impacted by Sheba's death, and but I was like, oh, but it's just my cat. Like just like so I was minimizing it. Like,
Minimizing, yeah.
mm-hmm. And what I've noticed is like when I realized that, like, wait a second, no, this is a big deal. And it's okay to be upset about losing a cat that you've had for many, many years. And but with what's been interesting about Zeke, our male kitty, is that he has been so much more affectionate and so much more kind of like tied to the hip with us. Like cats don't usually like follow you around and
Yeah.
talk to you nonstop. And so he's like just like yammering all the time and talking and purring
Oh.
and trying to
No.
make connection. And
Hmm.
so I think he's really like on in one level feeling very insecure because he lost, his
Yeah.
kind of partner in the household. Um, Even though like they weren't the best of friends, but they were really, but really like for cats, they were really the best of friends. But
Hmm.
um, I think he's
Oh,
like also very much, I mean, I might be anthropomorphizing or putting things on him that maybe aren't really true, but I do think they are. I think he's very concerned with us and wanting to make sure
hmm.
that we
Yeah.
feel loved. And look at
Hmm.
that.
Hi.
Yeah. As we speak
Hi.
of the animals, here comes
Yes.
Harvey
I know,
right up
right?
with you.
Yeah.
Harvey saying hi.
Well, and I do want to
Um,
say, I get what you're
I
saying
love
because I
that.
know
It's
that
so
like people,
polite.
people have, um,
Go in
I
your
think
room,
that
babe.
especially in the counseling, like therapy world, there is a lot of talk of what did you call it? Anthropizing. So say it again.
So,
Anth
anthropomorphizing.
Anthropomorphizing. That's a big
Yeah,
word.
it
And
is a big word.
I assume that it means putting feelings on animals, right? Is that what
It's
that means in
it's
a short
giving them
swelling?
it's giving them
mhm.
more human
Human
qualities.
characteristics.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So I
Hmm.
do
Mhm.
this and I appreciate so much that you said, I know that I could be doing this, but I really think it's true. And I think that that's a lot of what being human means is to follow our intuition. So
Mhm.
on a side note, there is a Netflix show that's really good. My son loves cats and we can't have cats. So I let him watch whatever cat shows he wants. Like that's the way he
Aw.
gets his cat fix. But it's called The Mind of a Cat. And they have like
Mm.
these amazing studies done on animals and specifically cats. Like everybody thinks that cats aren't a lot like dogs, but they actually did this study where it proved that they're very much like dogs and they're highly intelligent.
Wow.
And they
Mhm.
actually
Hmm.
have like all these emotions and like can recognize
Oh.
their name and
Yeah.
just recognize voices. And so I've always just kind of like thought cats are smart, but they don't really care about us. But that again is
Mm.
probably anthropomorphizing. Did I say it right again? No,
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But I
Yeah.
so love that you're saying that because I think part of like an animal's role in our life is like as Harvey sits in your lap and is like, here I am. I think
Mhm.
they're actually there not only to serve, but they're also there to teach us about ourselves. Cause like you can see that when you're upset or when something's going on in the
Mhm.
house, you can see their energy shift really quickly. And so energy, like,
Mhm.
we talked about the emotion code way, way back. Energy is in every being. So like we are all made up of
Yes.
energy. And so when we're communicating, that's how we communicate with animals is the energy. And so when you're feeling like you're making the cat have its own like characteristics, human characteristics,
Mhm.
it's it could very well be you just picking up on the energy of the cat, like,
Totally.
so
Mhm.
it
Totally.
could be, but I get it because like I know there are times that I'm probably like making things up, but it makes me feel
Mhm.
better, and that's
Yeah.
what I
Mhm.
think that their job is to help us feel
Yeah.
better and to kind of soothe
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, what
Yeah.
it is, what sorry, Sarah, I was just going to
Oh
say
no,
what
you're
it
good.
is it's our way of making sense of things,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
anthropomorphization, I think I said that right, like is is like helping us make sense of animal behavior, right? And
Mhm.
because what we understand is, human behavior to a certain degree. I think we're still
Right.
trying to figure out human behavior, but
Yeah.
like that's I think a part of it is the meaning making. And I would never ever you know want to get in the way of somebody making sense of their experience. Like it's
Yeah.
really
Mhm.
important that we make sense of our
Yeah.
Mhm.
experience. We make sense of our animals experience. And so whether we're
Okay.
right or wrong, that's just a natural
Yeah.
tendency, is to make sense of things and to make
Right.
meaning of things.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of I just watched Frozen 2.
I love
Such
it.
a good movie,
It
by
is
the
a good
way.
movie.
I like it probably even more than the first one. And so anyway, I loved how the guy in it, he has a moose friend
Yeah.
and he's always like filling in for what the moose is thinking.
yeah,
And I'm like, and we do that with animals, like,
totally.
we'll put a voice to them like, I want this right now or whatever. Or maybe it's like,
Yeah,
but I just want to do like Harvey is definitely like do 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 like
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
He's a little
And isn't it
derpy.
interesting? Like
Yeah,
we make
I know.
different like levels of
Yes.
tones for them too. Like we
Uh-huh. Yeah.
recognize who they are
Mhm.
and like, oh, he would sound like this. And like,
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's
Mhm.
funny too, because I think that that character specifically, people probably really resonate with him that do this in their life. They're like, oh my gosh, I do this. And then you
Yeah.
kind of feel like more normal, like not so crazy talking for my dog. And
Mhm.
I get like, it's part of imagination. I think that it's really
Mhm.
healthy to have
Yeah.
imagination, and then
Mhm.
also it's another way of expressing, right? So like the things that maybe
Mhm.
you can't say out loud, or the things that like sometimes we'll say things about our dogs that like, oh, like I'll speak on her behalf, but it's really about me and like
yeah,
her
Mhm.
reaction with me. So it's
Mhm.
more of a way for us to talk about our feelings, but via
Mhm.
the animal, where it's
Yeah.
more safe, right? Like it's
Mhm.
safer to just let the animal talk. But
Exactly.
I wanted to go back to what you were saying about having big feelings. I think that this is a really
Mhm.
good conversation because
Mhm.
we had an incidence. I don't want to call it it. We had an experience of a lot of feelings, and it was at
Mhm.
counseling, and I didn't realize how much I was uncomfortable with big feelings, even though I'm a big
mm,
feelings person.
right.
As a mother,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
have a tendency, and I didn't recognize it until the counselor was like, I need you to just be, like, just allow us to be. So my son was like having a lot of crying and emotions, and it doesn't make me feel uncomfortable. It made me feel like they weren't safe. Because she was
Yes,
like,
Mhm.
I want you to ask yourself what you're feeling. And I was like, I just don't feel safe. Like, I feel like if I don't rescue him from this feeling, something
yeah,
bad is going to happen.
yes,
And so
Mhm.
she was like, I need you to go back into your childhood and ask yourself why you don't feel safe. Why does crying and big emotions make you feel like you
mm,
have to
Mhm.
rescue?
yeah,
Mhm.
So when
Wow.
you rescue, like basically you're coming in and you're soothing any part of that. You don't want them, it's not that you don't want them to have the feelings, but you
Mhm.
like let's contain it because something bad could happen. So for me, I
Mhm.
realized for myself that, oh, this is a part of me that hasn't been healed. And
hmm
it's more about keeping them safe. And in my head, it's weird because I can't really associate it with like any kind of behavior from a child, like from childhood. I don't have memories of not being safe when I was crying. Like I remember crying a
Mhm.
lot. Um, but I clearly somewhere along the
Mhm.
line, someone made me feel like it wasn't okay to do that
Mhm.
because I'm trying to like, it's okay. Like I was offering tissues and she's like, if he needs a tissue, he can ask for one. Like let him, she's like, this is part of him growing into an adult. Like
Mhm.
it's okay for him to ask
Mhm.
for what he needs. And if you give
Mhm.
him what he needs every time you think he needs it, he will never ask for what he needs.
Yeah.
So as a mom, I was
Yeah.
like, wow, I never had anybody tell me that because I
Mhm.
thought I was being a mom. Like, here's a tissue.
Mhm.
Oh, you need some
Mhm.
allergy medicine? Oh, you feel sick? Let me wrap you up. Like, we're just always
Mhm.
caretaking.
Mhm.
And I was like, I think for us both, it was very healing for me to sit there in an uncomfortable situation of like letting him just have these big
Mhm.
emotions. And then I was like, I kept telling myself, kept telling myself, you're safe. He's safe. Nothing bad is going to happen. We're in a safe space.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, so then I was able to create a positive experience
Mhm.
with his emotion because
Mhm.
at home, it's like, I'm like, what can I do to help him? What do I need to fix him? Like,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
Mhm.
just that moment of
Yeah.
feelings get scary, I think, for some
Yeah.
people because we have some trauma
Mhm.
back from early days and
Yeah.
you may not even know what it is. So like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's just really a habit of paying attention
Mhm.
when you get
Yeah.
into those spaces, whether it's you having the emotion or someone else is having an emotion and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, like I
Mhm.
used to just cry with everybody. And as I became an adult, then it became more of like, oh, and I think it came after motherhood. Like I started to want to console everyone, like, oh, everyone
Mhm.
needs consoling, but they
Yeah.
don't,
Mhm.
they need to have their feelings, which is
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
so contradictory to my business. Like
Mhm.
what I do is I allow people to have feelings, but when I'm creating that space to do it,
Yeah.
it feels safe. But when
Yeah.
Mhm.
people are just having it, I'm like, oh, this could go awry.
Yeah.
So I'm like, I'm practicing with myself, reminding myself I'm safe. There's no emergency. And I think
Mhm.
there's a woman on Instagram, Dr. Feelgood Inside. Have you seen her? You would love
Mm.
her, Genevieve. Sarah, you would too.
Cool.
She talks a lot about like when kids are having big feelings or when they're being defiant, a lot of it is they just want to be heard. They just want you to
Mhm.
recognize what their needs are. And then you
Mhm.
can talk about like, hey, I really see, like, I know that you don't want to get up for school today. And I recognize
Mhm.
that you're probably tired. We all get tired. And that's why we try to get a good night's sleep. Like you kind of like walk them through. Yes, I see
Mhm.
your feelings. I hear what you're saying. And then you can tend to it once they've had their emotion about it. Like everybody's
Mhm.
allowed to be angry, sad, whatever it is they're
Yeah.
feeling
Mhm.
about what they don't get to do
Mhm.
because and it's really beautiful the way she walks you through it. So Dr. Becky Feelgood or Dr.
Yeah.
Feelgood Inside, Dr. Becky. But anyways, that was my whole side
I'll look that
tangent
up.
of like caretaking and rescuing. So I love that you brought that
Mhm.
up too. I just
Yeah.
wanted to circle back to it.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so
I
good.
was just going to add that I think that we have a hard time sometimes making the distinction between supporting someone in their experience of a big feeling versus, um, you know, kind of stopping that feeling in its
Yeah.
tracks, and so
Mhm.
the intention is really to support and to work on ourselves around how do
Mhm.
we move through big feelings in a way that doesn't cause harm. It's
Yeah.
not really about like not having the feeling. It's about, I can
Mhm.
have this big feeling and not do anything super reactive that's going to harm a relationship or harm myself or, get me into trouble. And I
Yeah.
think that's really
Mhm.
like that's what regulation is. It's not about not having any emotions. It's about moving through an emotion and getting back to a place of balance and moving through a big emotion effectively with the support of others or
Yeah.
with our internal skill sets that we develop over time. And I think that, I see this particularly in schools again, where it's like if 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 a kid has a reactive moment or has a big feeling, especially high risk kids,
Mhm.
we start to view it as a failure. And really the reality is that if a person feels safe enough to show what they're feeling, and of course, like kids lose containment generally with people that they feel safe with.
Mhm.
Um, and so viewing it as an opportunity, like, wow, this kid feels safe enough to let it all out.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
how do I move like move into this process with them of supporting them in getting re-regulated and then processing and moving through the emotion, but not
Mhm.
stopping it, like not
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
not stopping it in its tracks, because going back to the emotion code, if we don't have that full experience of an emotion,
Yeah.
it
Mhm.
gets trapped,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
and I
Mhm.
really resonated with that. I really like one of the things that I took away from that was it's very important not to disrupt the
Yes.
process of feeling um of having an emotion.
Yeah.
It's
Mhm.
really important to feel that completely and move through
Mhm.
it. And really our jobs as adults with our children and our jobs as ourselves is just to make sure that when we're moving through that experience, we're not doing harm.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
because that
it
is
kind of
where
reminds.
the trapped emotion, sorry, Sarah, I was just going to say real quick on that, when that is where that trapped emotion gets locked in, is
Hmm.
when you have a stop in the processing. There's like a 4-step process and it gets partway through interrupted. And then if it's added trauma to that with the arguments or the just go to your room or whatever it is that's happening, then that's where
Mhm.
it really starts to pile on.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me, I mean, especially I just see it all the time on memes and shirts, and it just reminded me of like the "I'm fine, you're fine, everything's fine."
Everything's fine.
Everything's
Right.
fine. And I'm like, oh my gosh, but I almost feel like, yeah, it just needs to be rewritten and to say like, I'm not fine, you're not fine, but everything's fine. Like, you know
Yes.
what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Love that.
accepting it as
The whole
like, it's gonna
experience is
be, the
fine.
whole experience is still fine, even if you're not personally
We
at
should
a point.
recreate that.
I know,
We should create that.
right?
Like you and I can just be
I'm not
crying. Like
fine, you're
we'll
not
take a
fine, but
picture.
everything's fine.
We'll be
Yeah.
crying, and then Genevieve will be like,
Yeah.
"Everything's fine," because
Yeah.
she's like
There
the
you
one
go.
that's telling us it's okay.
I'm not
And
fine, you're
Sarah and
not
I are
fine,
like,
but everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I do find that like, I mean, because I was such even just like throughout my life, and even now you guys are like, well, Sarah just cries easily, and I'm like, wow, that is so not who I was. Like, 15 years ago, though.
Yeah.
Like it's just so just to let people know, like, yes, people can change, and also like let children embrace that.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a chance though they will later on, because I was very much like, nope. I'm gonna fight the tears, and I
Yeah,
was so stubborn, and I just hated, like appearing weak, and you know what I mean,
Hmm.
like I think that's, and that can easily carry into adulthood, and I think that's why it's so important to understand, like, it's
Yeah.
okay to embrace those feelings. Again, we don't want those trapped emotions, we don't want to
Yeah.
live inauthentically, because really you can't connect with another human being if you are hiding who you truly
Yeah.
are,
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's
Totally.
where it's really important to like
Yeah.
be okay with allowing yourself to grieve, to be sad, to share your journey, and and usually, and I need to make sure that I'm on the side of like, are you able to listen, or are you trying to fix the situation, like Cassie had
yeah,
mentioned? Like I fall into that, even not, I mean, not as a parent, but like as a coach, or
yeah.
and so I kind of have to say, like, do you need me to listen, or do you want me to find a solution for you? And I've
Yeah.
mentioned that to quite a few people, because I understand, like, sometimes they're like, oh, you're being a jerk. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm just
Right.
trying to help. Like, I'm
Totally.
really not trying to like, say what you're doing is wrong. I'm,
Yeah,
I'm trying to help in a way, but that's not what
Hmm.
they need. They don't need to like uncover the solution and take action. They need to grieve and let it out, and really let it come to the surface. And real change happens from the inside, not just because somebody told you the solution. Like,
Yes.
you have to
Yes.
come to that on your own. So,
Totally. That is so true. I was gonna say I love that addition,
yeah, me too.
Sarah, and really acknowledging that it's so critical to
mhm,
um to embrace the full spectrum of the emotion,
mhm,
and allow people to have their emotional experience without it coming in and trying to fix it, because it can
Yeah,
mhm,
disrupt the process, right?
yeah,
So, what I imagine, like, I think I do this pretty well, is I imagine, and I think we all do this very well in certain
mhm,
contexts, is that like that just that process of being able to hold space for somebody,
mhm,
and be present with them and not be uncomfortable in
yeah,
that
mhm,
experience is
Mhm.
really, really healing and regulating, which is the first step in being able to move,
Mhm.
move to the relationship piece and to move to the reasoning or making sense making of it, right? Which is that whole process that, in the emotion code that he talks about.
Hmm.
And it is what, neuroscientists talk about a lot is that you can't disrupt the process or things get stuck, and then you can have trauma or just a lot of lack of resolution. And so that desire to move in and fix is a great instinct, and we have to like press the pause button and remember
Yeah.
just to hold space. Like, how can I sit
Mhm.
with and hold space for this person who needs to
Mhm.
feel? Because oftentimes if we go right into fix mode, people are really upset with that. Like,
Mhm.
no,
Yeah.
just let me have my experience. And the
Well, and
other thing
also,
go ahead,
oh
Cass.
no, I was just going to say to add to that a little side note, people who are empathic, like empaths have a really hard time allowing people, like that is a lot of, I've had to work through that part
Yes,
of it, allowing people to have their feelings, but also not like attaching onto it or taking it on,
yes,
because a lot of times what ends up happening with people who are
Mhm.
empaths, they just take on that feeling, and
yes,
then that's a lot of why they fix. Like I know that's why I
yes.
do it.
Oh,
A lot of the
absolutely.
reasoning is because I
Mhm.
don't like to feel what other people are feeling, because sometimes it's really heavy.
It's too
So I
much.
think
Yeah,
that's how I coped as a child. And so now I've learned as an
absolutely.
adult, people
Mhm.
outside my home, I don't really do it with, but caretaking, I notice it. I do it more with people I feel safe with, that I'm like,
Totally.
Mhm.
okay, I need to be aware of this. And so, like, I always joke, I don't like to go to Walmart because there's a lot of feelings in Walmart. Like, I can't, I have to, like, I call it zipping up in my crystal suitcase or my crystal
Yeah,
sleeping bag. So I like literally, I
I love
will
that.
envision myself zipping up a sleeping bag and like putting up this ball of energy. And so when I walk into wherever, like even large spaces, like Thunder
Mhm.
games, if I'm going to like a
Mhm.
big event, I have to zip myself up because I'm such an empath. I
Mhm.
can take things on, and I actually can get like the shakes from if people are having
totally.
like so much excitement,
Mhm.
my body physically feels it. And I'm like, oh, it's
Yeah,
too much.
Mhm.
I can't. So I now have my crystal
Mhm.
sleeping bag that I just wrap around
I
my
love
little
that.
body, and it helps.
Aw.
But
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's really interesting because you want people to have their feelings, but when you're in a big space like that, you're like, this isn't the time. There's too many people here to have feelings. But then, you can have your feelings wherever you want. You just, as an adult, you should
Mhm.
probably appropriately like let yourself have space where not everyone else has to like feel the
Yeah.
whole feeling.
Mhm.
I think there's an interesting aspect of that too, is that like as our brains develop, we can have the expectation of adults, and I think we should have the expectation of adults to um to really think about their audience, to really think about time and place, to really be thoughtful about, like, wow, I'm really in an intense place and in an intense motion. And
Yeah.
it's probably a good idea for me to maybe take a mental health day. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's a good
Mhm.
idea for me to, to skip seeing this particular client or this, to really problem solve so that your big emotions and your emotional process doesn't impact another person negatively, right?
Mhm.
So that's the thing about adulthood. Kids just need a lot of support, and they're just building the tools in their toolkit. But actually what I'm finding is adults didn't get a lot of this. They didn't get a lot of support for, put arming, building their armory, or, well, actually, you know what I mean, with the
Yeah.
daring greatly, like, armory is too heavy and the tools are too light.
Mhm.
They don't have the
Yeah.
right tools. A lot of adults don't.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so, but yeah, I think I'm sorry if that was a sort of a random uh, aside, but I just think our efforts are really to how do you have this big emotional experience and not disrupt it and still do it
Mhm.
in a way that's not impacting yourself or others negatively.
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
my example from last week is, honestly, taking that day with Sheba. Like,
Mhm.
I was embarrassed to call my boss and ask to take the time, which
Mm.
is so weird. But
Wow.
I knew that I
Mhm.
needed to take the time because,
Mhm.
I was going to be an emotional wreck. It was going to be very difficult for me to show up with clients. in the
Hmm.
process of having this vet come and euthanize my animal. So I took the day, and I'm
Hmm.
really glad that I did. And I'm really glad that even like in the process of minimizing it, I realized that that's what I was doing, and I realized that it was important to have the full emotional experience.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, you know, and that I think allowing myself to have that full emotional experience is allowing me to grapple with this more. I think that
Hmm.
one of the things too is that we have to remember that um, the process might be scary, but the end result is that you've come through something in and grown or processed it effectively. And I think that's
Yeah.
really important too. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
absolutely.
100%. I feel like too, it's like every time you allow yourself to experience those emotions, it's like, we're like that onion and it's like
Yeah.
unpeeling another layer, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
that's a part of really healing. And I think like
Yes.
allowing
Yeah.
yourself to experience that is like, yeah, you were able to share, like show yourself that self-love. And I think that's
Yes.
really, and people, I think people do respect that. Like, I think sometimes I know you've said, "Oh my gosh, this happened and I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "But you're the type of person that you don't need to ask for forgiveness." You know what I mean? Like this is you're not a repeat offender. Come on. Like I think too often the people that care the most are the ones that should show themselves the most compassion because it's like we get so in our head to please everybody else that when it's our turn to take
Absolutely.
care of ourselves, it's like, oh, I have so much guilt and shame, and it's like, well, don't,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
Yes.
you deserve that self-love probably more than a lot of people out there that are just like taking advantage of other people and just be like, well, here's another mental health day. I know it's my 18th this month, but I don't care.
Yeah.
Right.
Like
No, exactly.
so I
Exactly.
think, yeah, I think it's like we don't want to come across that way.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think really in actuality, that's just our ego to be like,
Yeah.
you didn't do enough. You're not good enough to do that. Like,
Exactly.
and I think,
Exactly.
when you can prove to yourself that you are and you're willing to take care of yourself, again, like you're getting closer to that really understanding
Yeah.
of what you need emotionally, and also
Yeah.
understanding that you are worthy of love, especially love from yourself. So
Totally.
I'm proud of you, lady, because you
The,
care for a lot of people.
the ego
Thanks.
is another thing we should talk about. That would be like a
Yes.
whole nother like
Mhm.
show that we should do to talk about the ego versus the self. Like that's
Yes.
Oh
really
yeah.
powerful to talk about those
Mhm.
pieces of us that don't really make sense and they don't make
Yeah.
sense because they're not
Mhm.
really,
Oh
well,
yeah.
we won't even get into it, but we should
Yeah.
put that on our list. That should be one that
Okay.
we should talk about.
Mhm.
For sure.
Which I have a couple of book suggestions if
Mhm.
we're still looking. Have we decided on a book for next month?
No, I think
I
we're
think,
going to talk about it. I
yeah.
put out a couple of possibilities, and
Mhm.
other
Oh, you
people are
did.
more than welcome to put
Cool.
out some
Oh
possibilities
yeah.
too.
Nice.
I think
Um,
tomorrow when we discuss it on book
Yeah.
club to talk to the
Yeah.
book club
So
people.
come to the
Yeah,
book
come
club
to book club.
if you have not heard, we have a book
yes,
club on
Mhm.
Saturday mornings
Yeah.
at 10 a.m. Right? 10 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Central,
8
7
a.m.
a.m.
Mountain
Mountain,
Standard.
7 a.m. Pacific. I don't think we have anybody from Pacific
Yeah.
yet. Not yet, but
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
I think one of the things I want to kind of go
yeah.
back on to on our grief topic
Mhm.
is my son specifically. He has a lot of I just want to say, I don't want to say he has a lot of needs. He has a lot of um opportunities to grow, just the way that he processes things. And so we're working through kind of how he works through things. And so when we lost our dog in October, he didn't tell anyone that he was really distraught over losing the dog. And the dog was really his. Like it was a family dog, but
Aw.
when we purchased the dogs, well, we didn't purchase them. We adopted them through like a rescue. My son has one, and then my other son had one, and so they were supposed to take care of them, but this lady took care of everything because that's what happens when kids are 7. Like they're like, yeah, I'll take care of the dog. So when she passed away, it was his dog. And actually, what's interesting is to watch not having her here, his joy has diminished significantly.
Mm,
So I've
Oh.
actually been thinking about that because I've been really kind of paying attention to children who have like ODD or
yeah.
ADHD. Having a pet is really
Mm.
important for them, like to be able
Yes.
to kind of regulate and to like receive and reciprocate love and
Mhm.
feelings.
Yeah.
When she passed, though, we didn't know this was what was happening until he started like I started having him like writing his feelings. I was like, you really need to just start putting those feelings somewhere, because if you don't, they're just going to keep getting stuck. And I was
Mm.
doing like emotion code with him, and it just wasn't enough. Like there was so much feeling and grief around
Yeah.
her because she was his
Oh.
dog. Like if you would
Mhm.
have seen, I wish that I would have recorded it. Like we don't record the every day to day like things.
Yeah.
But he would come down the stairs, and her joy and excitement to see him was like through the roof. Like you would have thought that she just won
Oh.
the lottery, like somebody gave her 50 million treats, and she's like
Oh.
bouncing all over and like, oh my gosh, just so much joy.
Oh.
So after
Mm.
probably a few weeks, he had started writing some pretty dark stuff, and he came to me and said, I need you to read this because I'm feeling kind of like scared that I'm having these thoughts that are not, they don't seem like me. And
Mm.
so we were, I read through them, and some of them were suicidal. And
Hmm.
so we had been working with the counselor, but he never mentioned, because no one really talks about grief being okay to work through. And
Yes.
Mm.
so I was like, oh my gosh, like it didn't even occur to me, because I was in my own grief of losing her and how sudden it was, that I hadn't even really like turned to try and figure out. Like, I mean, I was asking them if they felt okay, do they want to talk, but like I wasn't really paying attention to the signs. And so
Hmm.
when we started talking about that, I was like, the suicidal wasn't really suicidal. It was more of like he didn't understand death. Like he was like, I just
Yeah.
want to be with her. So it wasn't that he wanted to die, he wanted to be with her. And
Mm.
he saw that that
Yeah.
was the only way. And he was
Yeah.
trying to rationalize it in his child brain.
Mm.
So all that to be said, had we actually like allowed him to kind of go back a few weeks and process it, even though it was kind of so sudden, I think he wouldn't have had all those feelings, but he just
Yeah.
kept shoving more and more grief down and more and more grief down. And then on top of that, not having the joy that she brought him. So it was like this
Mhm.
Mhm.
twofold. There was no
Totally.
extreme joy, and then there was this extreme sadness. So he was like totally drained.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important that when you do lose a pet, a friend, a loved one, I mean, anyone, it's really, really important to have someone who is your support to say, like, I'm having these really dark feelings and I'm not expressing it. Like he wasn't
Yeah.
expressing it. He would like say he was sad to like he missed her, but there was no
Hmm.
emotion behind it.
Yeah.
He was like, I really miss her a lot.
Yeah.
And he's a crying kid. So like he wasn't crying. And I just thought, okay, there eventually it's gonna kick in, but he never really did. And so I think part of like his explosion last week was built up grief over these last
Yeah.
6 months because he was missing her so much. He just kept stuffing it down. And then like his eating problem got worse, and like all these other addictions increased because he wasn't feeling his feelings. So
Right.
I think that that's really what I wanted to say is, if you don't heal some big emotions, like the ones that really need to come out, then your other problems, your coping mechanisms, your addiction is a coping mechanism,
Yeah.
those are going to increase if there's nowhere to
Yeah.
put the feelings that you're having. So
Yeah.
it's really, really healthy to have someone. And so like here again, we're sharing our tools and our resources. Obviously it's really important that you get to a doctor or counselor to kind of like get assistance if you're having extreme feelings, especially like suicidal thoughts. We'll make sure to put the suicide hotline in our comments below. But I
Hmm.
think that's really important for us to acknowledge. When you have those big feelings, if you're not handling them properly, they can turn to suicide, and not because you want to die, but because you don't know how to regulate. It's just too much. Like you just have
Yeah.
to have somewhere
Yeah.
to put it.
Yeah. Well, and it's can lead to it just it's the disconnection and isolation that leads to maladaptive coping. And one of the maladaptive coping strategies that comes to mind is um, wish like just wanting to end one's life. It's one of many addictions, self-harm, all of those things. Like
Yeah.
if we are isolating ourselves from our experience, which is what we do when we
Yeah.
do not allow ourselves to have the full emotional experience, we are more inclined to turn to things that just perpetuate disconnection.
Yeah.
Um, and the ultimate would be ending one's life, right? And so I think that the other thing I just wanted to say is that grief is so interesting, and everybody experiences it very differently. And some people have, more capacity to access certain aspects of that process. Some people move through the stages like multiple times and in different orders. And I think it's just really important to remember too. This was really important for me with losing Sheba was, I was the crier. I was the emotional one. It was intense. And my son Nolan actually had shared in circle time the next day that he felt badly because he didn't cry a lot about Sheba. And so we talked together afterwards about the unique process of grief and that, the way that he handled it and experienced it both, as just an individual and as an individual who's neurodiverse, or neurodivergent, was different, and that's okay. It
Yeah.
didn't mean that the impact of the loss wasn't as great for him, just he's processing it differently. And
Yeah.
it's been interesting because how he's been processing it is um uh, really about like he's been a lot more loving to our other cat, and I think there's a
Mhm.
part of him that's like, I gotta love this cat as much as possible before he goes away too, you know so it's just interesting. I think it's
Yeah.
important, but big emotions can lead to, if not addressed, can lead to really dangerous things. And
Yeah.
so it's really, really important, like you said, Cassie, to seek out support. Um, and it's really important to, I think, to do a deeper dive into the function of emotions and understand. I think psychoeducation is really critical with
Mhm.
grief and loss and, all of these things. It's important to educate yourself. And there's so many things out there about grief. Maybe I can throw up a couple of things, resources too about the grief and the grieving process in our comments here. I think I will do that today.
So I want to address a question maybe that I think would people that are tuning in to watch this that are probably thinking, how do I have time to educate myself to know what I should do about my emotions? Like what are some tools that we could recommend that the busy, human being these days, we all have like these crazy busy schedules, which first of all is a whole nother topic that could be discussed. But if people are wondering, how do I do that? And my life is already busy. I'm a parent, or maybe I'm just full time, 12 businesses, whatever it is that they're struggling with. How can we give them a few tools that they could kind of work through or be educated in a quick way? Like you're saying, we'll drop some resources in there. What are some other tools? How we all, like Sarah, Genevieve, what do you guys do to help yourself? That could be something that's a quick, like less than 15-minute thing to kind of work through emotions or even educate yourself about emotions or to be healthier in your emotional state, emotional resilience.
Yeah. Well, I think that, yeah, like we want to provide brief articles. I think it's really easy
Yeah.
to find, and have direction around certain websites that are really, really pointed about what they discuss and how they educate. I love Dan Siegel's website, Brene Brown's website. There's lots of really cool nuggets in those websites. Um, we can throw up some resources, but it's I think it's also just really helpful if you're short on time, um to just do. I think a really helpful tool is mindfulness. And mindfulness can be practiced really, really easily, anytime, anywhere, any place, and it can be very brief. It's just attunement to your current surroundings without judgment. And I think I could lead everyone through a really neat and simple mindfulness practice next week as an example or at some point. Um, I
Sorry, I
think,
have the doorbell just rings. Hang on.
yeah, no worries. And
Oh yeah.
I think journaling, like Sarah, journaling,
Mm-hmm.
like, do you find that's helpful for you in sort of navigating, big
Mm-hmm.
situations, big emotions, big,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of the day to day and keeping yourself regulated?
Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh definitely. I think it's also kind of understanding yourself enough to understand like what can help.
Yeah,
Because I think whatever it is we recommend, sometimes it's not what you need in that moment.
yeah,
Because even with journaling, what if I mean, I've definitely journaled before. Sometimes I go into like a spiral though, because I'm
Mhm.
just thinking of these things and then I'm compacting more over it. And
Totally. So it can
in
be,
some yeah. So in some ways it's a negative, it's more of a negative experience. But same thing with
yeah,
like, maybe, you're just like, oh, well, I'm gonna go out with friends and just vent. And you think
yes,
like, okay, sharing my emotions, maybe that'll help me. And then after you feel worse. So it's
yes,
like I think just being more aware to what you need. And actually what you had mentioned, I was thinking of, I was like, you know what, just 15 minutes outside. And I loved how you did, and it's probably the same thing where you tapped into being like present with your
mhm,
five
yes,
senses. Is that what
yes,
you were gonna do? Or
yeah,
at least talk about?
so,
Because
yes,
that's what I thought of. I was like, sometimes we just need quiet and outside and
yes,
just thinking about, what do I smell? What do I hear? What do I taste? What do I see? And just like
yes,
stopping your brain from doing all
yes,
the things and just like being in a moment of like being and then
yes,
coming to a place of like, okay, I'm here, I'm breathing,
yes,
it's going to be okay. Like sometimes
yes,
just starting with something as simple as that, which you can do
yes,
anytime, any place. And I
yeah,
I think,
yeah.
yeah,
And
I
it
think that's
doesn't
important.
cost anything. It's not therapy.
Yeah.
You don't like it
Mm-hmm.
does can take very little time. It doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, setting an
I
alarm for 5 minutes in doing it,
totally,
like, yeah.
exactly. And it's just, and they're so simple, like really simple practices. Like you do not have to
Mm-hmm.
sit down and listen to an insight timer, 20-minute meditation. Like there's some really neat mindfulness activities that you can do just very intentionally throughout the day that just connect you more to yourself and then by extension connect you more to others. Another strategy, and I know we have to get going, but another strategy that I do both with adults, families, and kids is um, we 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 create like a crisis survival kit, and that can be something that you create together as a family. You can create it individually. I do it with kids all the time, and really, it's about things that are comforting to us, that are regulating for us, that are healthy, that speak to our five senses. And so it's also a mindfulness activity of like really thinking about like, you know, what is comforting for me to see? What is comforting for me to touch? What is comforting for me to taste? And having your kind of an idea of those things that are healthy, is, and then you can draw from your crisis survival kit in a situation where if you are so overwhelmed with emotion, you can't think, you've got your crisis survival kit written out and it's like, oh yeah, I remember, I need to take a walk because I need to feel the sun on my arms. I know that's really regulating for me. So that's a really great activity to do.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. And I like that idea. So next week, I think mention that, or we can
Yeah,
at least talk about it. And you do such a good job of facilitating like how to unplug. And so maybe
yeah,
come back, everybody, because we'll experience that and we can go through it
yeah,
together. And it can be something that you can record on your phone as you're
yes,
listening to it on your computer, maybe, or just record it
yes,
while it's going on and then use it like when you're at work and you need a little break, go to your car and,
yes.
or wherever you're at, because I think that can be helpful. So, yeah, I know I got to get going too. I have my book club. And so thank you guys. Hey, Nolan. Yeah, thank you again for taking the time to be here, ladies. And
Yeah,
I just want to say thank you again for all the tips and tools. And you guys definitely give me ideas. I think part of the
mhm,
healing is also community. And so I
yes,
just am so appreciative of all the tools that you
yeah,
guys share too. So thank
yeah.
you.
We
So,
we
yeah.
didn't do our quick disclosure, so I'm going to do that very quickly just to make sure
Oh,
everybody
yeah.
knows.
Hmm.
Nolan, be quiet. This is important. So we want to remind everybody that we come here with our own individual experiences and our own expertise, but we are not. This is not a substitute for treatment. So if you need medical or psychological treatment, it's very important that you pursue that. And if you need advice around how to connect with those types of supports, feel free to drop us a line. In Messenger here. I think you have access to our personal emails, things like that. So just make sure that you're aware that this is just informational and about our experiences, and it's intended to really open up a lot of different like um conversation and exploration around things, but it's not meant to serve as treatment for any sort of mental health or a medical diagnosis. So there we
Thank
go.
you. Yes,
Okay.
perfect. Thank you so
Thanks, guys.
much.
We'll see you all next
Yeah, I
Friday.
was gonna say bye,
And good luck
Cassie.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Bye,
All right. Thanks
Cassie.
again. Have a good
Thanks.
day. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.